But this nation was also fully attuned to intellectuality. It was at all times superior to others in strict logic, in the meditative profundity of its interpretation of the world, even in the austere intellectuality of both its most gigantic fantasies and its highest ethical ideals, yet it was inferior to many in radiating warmth of sentiments and in will power. It became a mere spectator and a logical designer of the course of the world, but this rested ultimately upon emotional decisions, upon the immensity of suffering out of which grew a metaphysical religious sense of its cosmic necessity, because the individual cannot cope with it, either in the emotional sphere or by diverting it into a vigorous life practice. This same objectivity of living conditions is itself also a result of their relationship to money. I have pointed out in an earlier context why trade represents such a considerable improvement over the originally undifferentiated subjectivity of man. There are still peoples today in Africa and Micronesia who know of no other change in ownership than in the form of theft and the gift. However, just as for more advanced peoples objective interests are joined by and transcend the subjectivistic impulses of egoism and altruism, alternatives in which ethics unfortunately still confines human motivations, and just as devotion and commitment to such interests has nothing to do with the relationships among human subjects, but deals with objective expediency and ideals, so exchange evolved a change of ownership according to criteria of objective correctness and fairness transcending the egoistical impulsiveness of theft and the no less altruistic impulsiveness of the gift. Money represents the moment of objectivity in exchange activities, as it were, in pure isolation and independent embodiment, since it is free of all the specific qualities of the individual things exchanged and thus per se has no biased relationship to any subjective economic element. Similarly, theoretical laws represent the independent objectivity of nature, in relation to which every individual case appears to be accidental, the counterpart to the subjectivity of man. The fact that, nonetheless, different people have very different relationships to money demonstrates money's complete independence from any subjective particularity. Money shares this quality with the other major historical forces which can be compared to large lakes from which one may draw from any side and draw all that the available receptacle allows according to its form and size. The objectivity of human interaction which, however, is only a formation of material originally offered by subjective energies, but one that ultimately takes on its own independent existence and norms, finds its highest expression in purely monetary economic interests. Whatever is sold for money goes to the buyer who offers most for it, quite regardless of what or who he is. Where other equivalents play a role, where a possession is given away for reasons of honor, service or gratitude, then the character of the person who receives it is taken into consideration. Conversely, whenever I buy for money's sake, it is irrelevant from whom I buy what I want as long as it is worth its price. But wherever one pays for something with a service or personal commitment of an internal or external kind, then one carefully checks the person one is dealing with, because we do not wish to give away to anybody anything that belongs to us except money. The statement on bank notes to the effect that their value is paid to the bearer without proof of identity typifies the absolute objectivity with which money transactions operate. Within this area, there is a counterpart to the Hindu peasant's exemption from acts of war even among a much more emotional people. Among some American Indian tribes the trader is permitted to move freely among tribes who are at war with his own. Money places the actions and relations of men quite outside of men as human subjects, just as intellectual life, in so far as it is purely intellectual, moves from personal subjectivity into the sphere of objectivity which it only reflects. This obviously implies a relationship of superiority. Just as he who has money is superior to he who has the commodity, so the intellectual person as such has a certain power over the more emotional, impulsive person. For however much the latter may be more valuable as a whole person, and however much his powers may ultimately surpass the other, he is more one-sided, more committed and prejudiced than the intellectual person. He does not have the superior view and the unlimited possibilities of the use of all practical means that the purely intellectual person has. It is this factor of superiority, common to both money and intellectuality by virtue of their objectivity towards any particular life contents, that prompted Cont to place bankers at the head of secular government in his utopian state, because bankers formed the class with the most general and abstract functions. This interrelationship is already discernible in the medieval journeymen's associations in which the treasurer was, at the same time, the head of the association. The dual roles of intellect and money, with regard to function, they are individualistic and egoistic. This explanation of the correlation between intellectuality and the money economy, based on the objectivity and indeterminacy of character that was common to both, may be seriously challenged with a powerful counterargument. Alongside the impersonal objectivity inherent in the content of intelligence, there exists an extremely close relationship between intelligence and individuality and the whole principle of individualism. Money, for its part, no matter how much it translates impulsive subjective modes of behavior into superpersonal and objective normative modes, is nonetheless the breeding ground for economic individualism and egoism. Here we obviously confront the ambiguities and complexities of concepts that must be clearly distinguished in order to understand the style of life that is designated by them. The dual role which both the intellect and money play becomes intelligible if one distinguishes their essentially objective content from their function, or, in other words, from the uses to which they are put. In the first sense, the intellect possesses a leveling, one might almost say communistic, character, first, because the essence of its content is that intellect is universally communicable and that, if we presuppose its correctness, every sufficiently trained mind must be open to persuasion by it. There is absolutely no analogy to this in the realms of the will and the emotions. In the case of the intellect, every transference of the same inner constellation depends upon the individual's given frame of mind, and any compulsion will be only conditionally submitted to. In the case of the will and the emotions, there are no proofs like those which, at least in principle, the intellect commands in order to spread the same conviction among the public at large. The ability to learn which belongs solely to the intellect implies that one is on the same level as anyone else. In addition, the contents of the intellect, leaving aside quite fortuitous complications, do not possess the jealous exclusiveness that is common in the practical contents of life. Certain emotions, for example involved in intimate, personal relationships, would completely lose their significance and value if others were entitled to share them. It is also essential for certain objectives of the will that other people are excluded from both pursuing them as well as gaining them. It has been rightly suggested that theoretical notions, on the other hand, are like a torch whose light does not become dimmer by igniting innumerable others from it. Inasmuch as their potential boundless dissemination has no influence whatsoever upon their importance, they elude private ownership more than any other contents of life. Finally, they present themselves in a way that, in principle, excludes all individual contingencies from the assimilation of their content. We have no possibility of formulating emotional changes and energies of the will in such a clear and unambiguous way that everyone can refer back to them at any time, and use their objective structure to continually reproduce the same inner process. In contrast, only in intellectual matters do we possess an adequate means that is relatively independent of individual disposition, and this is found in language that proceeds through concepts and their logical interrelationship. But the significance of the intellect develops in a totally different direction as soon as real historical forces begin to channel these abstract objectivities and possibilities. First of all, it is precisely the general validity of knowledge and its consequent forcefulness and irresistibility that makes intelligence such a powerful weapon for its outstanding representatives. One can offer resistance to a superior will if one does not possess a suggestible nature, but one can elude a superior logic only by a stubborn "I don't want to," which implies a confession of inferiority. Furthermore, the daily struggle for existence and possessions is decided by a certain measure of intelligence, even though the great decisions among men originate from superintellectual energies. The power of superior intelligence rests upon the communistic character of its quality, because, in terms of its content, intelligence is universally valid and everywhere effective and recognized. The mere quantity of intellectual endowment of the individual